I'm a practicing physician. I see patients full-time, and I've been taking care of veterans for about 20 years now. And the veterans were the ones who really taught me about cannabis. They've been reporting to me for about the last decade that they've been getting benefit from this plant, but I was highly skeptical. I'm trained in a very conservative medical model where I don't value any meds unless they've been put through the whole FDA drug development process, and so it's really hard for me to embrace the reports that they were claiming to get such miraculous results from this plant. But eventually, you just couldn't ignore it. There was so much, just a mountain of anecdotal evidence that was accumulating over years, and plus collateral history from family members, from their children, saying that I got my dad back. So it was really compelling. And finally, this is how I entered the marijuana space. Then was I finally realized that we had a duty to these military veterans to at least study the plant in a rigorous, controlled environment, and then we designed a study with partnering with MAPS. And got FDA approval relatively quickly, and were able to see firsthand the barriers to marijuana research. Suddenly I became an expert on, these ridiculous barriers that the U.S. government has systematically impeded marijuana efficacy research in this country, and our study is a perfect example of the myriad ways that they stonewall this work. Here we are, we got FDA approval in early 2011. After we submitted the study design in 2010, we got FDA approval quickly after that, and 6 years later we're still unable to implement this research. We still have not enrolled our first veteran, and I think that's really shameful. We have an epidemic of veteran suicide in this country, and you would think that the government would expedite research like this that could potentially uncover a new treatment for PTSD, and instead they've stymied this at every turn. It's really the veteran community begging us not to give up, and we won't. We're going to persevere until this study finally gets underway. I think the hallmark of PTSD is the insomnia, the chronic sleep deprivation that's associated with the flashbacks and the nightmares, and I think that's what they are reporting they're getting the maximum benefit from, that they can, they use cannabis at night and they can finally get their first good night's sleep. They actually wake up feeling refreshed for the first time. They actually can be functional again. So I think that's what surprises most of the vets, because a lot of the vets don't want to use cannabis. They want to be on the side of the law. A lot of them are really conservative. So for them to even try this was, it's often a big leap for them. But eventually they exhaust all of the conventional meds. They get completely demoralized, being pummeled with all these conventional pharmaceuticals, and finally they put their toe in with cannabis, and and many of them are having excellent results. And I don't want to portray this as any kind of cure-all. There's certainly a number of vets who do have side effects from this, who can have adverse events, but they're extremely rare compared to cannabis, compared to most of the meds I prescribe to people every day, is much less toxic, much more benign side effect profile than most of these much more harmful addictive meds that I give to people every day. So I think overall, generally it's really well tolerated by the veteran population, and the challenge is when people have adverse events, it's usually just from lack of information, that they try too much. They try an edible, for instance, that may be too potent, and they don't have any guidance. So that's why what's been really critical in this country is we're seeing all these sort of underground veterans networks now, where vets are teaching each other about how cannabis works, and sharing their own personal experiences has really helped the vets learn from each other and avoid some of those pitfalls. So I'm really grateful to because the vets know that they can't rely on their doctors, right? The physician community is not going to be able to guide them. There's very few docs in this country who know anything about cannabis, who know how to counsel patients on cannabis. That there's just a small minority of docs that are that well educated, that are so progressive in their thinking. The rest of them are terrified of the word cannabis, were trained from medical school that cannabis has no medical benefit and that it's a highly addictive drug that's dangerous and causes a lot of problems in people's lives. And only recently now we're seeing a few medical schools that are finally starting to acknowledge that there is an endocannabinoid system. That's the first step, right? That medical schools begin to teach the fact that there is this basic physiology, that there is a real biologic underpinning to this. It's not just stoners trying to get high. There's a real therapeutic potential there, and patients are leading the way, and veterans especially are like the tip of the spear here, trying to help enlighten the rest of the community of our society about how this plant has benefited them. I think folks have expressed concern about my advocacy role, that I've become more of an activist than a scientist, but that's not true. I was forced to become an activist because our research was continually blocked. But ultimately, I care about about collecting objective data about how this plant operates, and I don't want, there's no other agenda here except to have the data of the highest integrity that is unassailable and that can eventually be published in high-level peer-reviewed medical journals. So it's important to emphasize the way our study was designed to eliminate human bias. So even if I had an agenda going, which I don't, I have never used cannabis personally in any formulation. I'm not part of the, I don't own dispensaries. I don't write certifications for marijuana patients. I only care about the science, and I'm squarely focused on collecting objective, unassailable data. And so if the data proves that marijuana is not helpful for PTSD, or it's even dangerous, then all of that data will be published. And I'm really proud of the fact that I'm working with MAPS, which is also committed to that same mission. We intend to put all the good and the bad of marijuana into the public domain, unlike pharmaceutical companies. For years, I did clinical trials for Big Pharma out of residency, and I can tell you that it was the opposite environment there, where only data that made their drug look favorable, that was the only data that ever saw the light of day. And so I'm really proud to be associated with a nonprofit that has this high integrity, where they're committed to putting it all out there and letting the public scrutinize everything, unlike Big Pharma, which suppresses data that isn't favorable to their drug. I've been so heartened to see the medical community kind of envelop us, wrap around our efforts to, they're not openly, a lot of them don't feel comfortable to publicly state their support, but I've been really enjoying a tremendous amount of private support from physicians and other members of the healthcare community who are urging us to keep going and please don't give up, because they want the data also, and they're grateful that anybody's willing to stick their neck out and talk about this openly. And I feel like I have a duty not just to our veterans, but to all the patients who are sick and who need access. And for me, it's an obvious decision. There's no question about what the right thing to do is, because I'm a scientist, but I'm allowed to have political views and I'm allowed to express them. And if the universities don't embrace that idea and they want to terminate this research, then we will continue to persevere outside the university, and that's what we're doing now. Since the U of A terminated us a year and a half ago, we are happily independent. We received a $2.2 million grant from the Colorado Health Department, a wonderful partnership with Johns Hopkins University, and we are going to continue this momentum until we finally get our first veterans enrolled and until we get good data.